everybody. I'm Rachel Bauer. I'm the PI of AT Central, and I'm here with my colleague Kendra. She'll introduce herself in just a second. We're really excited to share lots of good information with you and get your questions answered today on our webinar. We are at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we've been part of the AT community, goodness, for probably almost 15 years, something like that, long time. So Kendra, why don't you introduce yourself too?
Hi everyone, thank you for the introduction, Rachel. My name's Kendra Boda and I'm Metadata and Information Specialist with ATE Central. I maintain the ATE Central Resource Portal and I work with community members like you in archiving your deliverables. So the goal for today's presentation is to answer these 4 questions. What is the NSF ATE archiving requirement? What is the ATE Central Archiving Service? How do I archive with ATE Central? And what happens after I submit my work?
All right, so we have a poll question for you because we always like to know who's on with us. So Mike is going to pop that up, and we just want to know kind of how you describe yourself. So affiliated with a current AT project, with a center, maybe not funded, but writing an ATE grant, or something else you'd like to share. And if you click on other, go ahead and pop that into the chat window so we kind of know how you would describe yourself. And just as a reminder, while you're working on the poll, that any questions you have as we're working through the webinar today, put in chat, because sadly you can't talk to us. We can only talk. It's a one-way presentation. We can't hear you. So pop things in the chat window and we'll make sure to get to those as we can.
Rachel, it's Mike. I'd like to remind folks to, if they choose, send it to panelists and all attendees so that we all see those questions, if they want to, of course.
That's great.
Got a bunch of poll results. Let me go ahead and show you the results of this poll, Rachel. Here we go.
All right. So lots of folks from projects, a few from centers, a couple people who are working on a grant. That's great. And then other. And if you want to pop other in the chat so we kind of know, it might be an evaluator or something. All right. Thanks, Mike. I think you can close that. So I want to just tell you a little bit about AT Central briefly. AT Central acts as an information hub and a centralized portal for the AT community. And our goal is really to amplify the impact of ATE and support the work of grantees. You'll be hearing a little bit more about the resource collection and the archiving service today. We also have a number of other tools and services, a newsletter, blog, lots of other good things that you can find, lots of help with outreach and dissemination too. We help folks think about social media strategies and a variety of other grant-related activities. And you can find lots of information about AT Central on the portal. And as always, you can email us if you have questions about the kinds of things that we do. And the archiving support and the service really came out of a need in the community and a need from NSF to make sure that the good work that you all are doing sticks around and is accessible going forward to other colleagues, to NSF itself, and to students. One of the things that's interesting about archiving that people may not realize is that it really helps fulfill your data management plan, and it can help with sustainability. It's a way to make sure that the materials that NSF fund you to create are not only available through your own website, but are available long-term through the ATE Central portal itself. And we create a number of different ways to help support you. Things like this webinar, we have guidelines, other support materials. We'll talk about the fact that we're going to be doing a demo at the PI conference. We'll give you a little more information about that. So we try to find ways to make sure that we make this as seamless and easy a process for you as we can. I'm going to turn it over to Kendra, who's going to talk a little bit more about that.
So we're going to start off with the RFP. So according to the NSF ATE RFP, grantees are required to archive their grant deliverables with ATE Central. So these deliverables are to be in a digital and archivable format with any intellectual property information clearly displayed. So over our next 5 slides or so, we'll go over each of these orange terms and phrases that are highlighted here individually. So deliverables. The deliverables of your project or center are described in your grant proposal, though they may evolve a bit over time, and that's perfectly all right. If you're unsure which of your deliverables should be archived with us, just reach out and we're more than happy to help you in identifying which materials are the most appropriate for archiving. Most of the materials that we collect fall into one of the first 4 categories listed here. So assessment, instructional, reference, and professional development. Assessment materials might include tests or answer keys, grading rubrics. Instructional materials include syllabi, lesson plans, presentation slides, case studies or labs, activities, tutorials, even games, and many other types of materials that our community members create. Reference refers to articles, reports, and career information. And then professional development materials often include things like presentation slides, webinar materials, and video recordings. We also collect something called samples. So samples are materials like best practice guides or other manuals or survey tools that you think would be valuable to other community members, either to use for their own projects or centers or to use as a reference as they work to create their own guides or survey tools. So materials submitted to ATE Central should be in a digital and archivable format. This slide depicts the file formats that we generally expect to see along with max file sizes, and you'll note that some of the files are listed as preferred, though we're really happy to accept a wide variety of other formats as well. We know that some of you use specialized software for your particular ATE areas and have specialized formats that are not listed here. And we do, of course, also accept those. We just sometimes have additional question about those file formats. So if you have formats not listed here, please feel free to reach out to us. But if you are producing audio, video, textual, visual, or courses in a learning management system, these are the file formats that we suggest. If you have larger file sizes than those listed here, we can still work with you. That's perfectly all right. I just ask that you please contact me directly and let me know about those larger file sizes because they might be a little more difficult to submit than some of the smaller files. Before I move on to the next slide, I'm also just going to add here that not all of your deliverables are going to be digital. And that's perfectly all right. Perhaps you were funded to organize a conference or a student competition, and neither of those activities are inherently digital, though these days they might be more digital than they have been in the past. But if you are hosting in-person events,
Carol,
you will
thanks.
still likely produce some sort of support materials that are digital. So perhaps you might have handouts about your competition or presentations that were produced at your conference. All those materials we can accept. So the last part of the RFP is the intellectual property piece. Under the RFP, grantees are encouraged, not required, but encouraged to make the materials that they've created available under a Creative Commons license so that your work can be used by others. Specifically, NSF encourages the use of the attribution share alike, and the attribution non-commercial share alike licenses. These licenses all allow others to copy, distribute, transmit, and generally adapt copyrighted works to varying degrees, as long as they attribute and share the work in the manner specified. So if you do choose to use a Creative Commons license, it must be affixed to the work itself. So on this slide is a screenshot of a recently archived PDF document submitted by NanoLink. On the first page of this instructor guide, I think it is, called Making Nano Gold, you'll see that there is a Creative Commons license there at the bottom of the PDF. So that same CC license is enlarged at the bottom of my screen, so that's a little easier for everyone to see. In this example, the work has an attribution non-commercial share-alike license. It's clearly displayed in a prominent location, so on the front page of the PDF. If another faculty member in Nano, in some Nano program, decides that they want to use this instructor guide in their own classroom, they can do so. In fact, they're free to share the guide, so to copy and to redistribute that material in any medium and in any format. They can adapt that guide, so to remix, transform, or build upon the material as long as they give credit, provide a link to the license, and indicate if changes were made. What they may not do is use the material for commercial purposes. If that faculty member chooses to remix, transform, or build upon, they must distribute their contributions to the work, so the new work that they've created, under the same license as the original work. And all of this is evident in that single CC license icon that you see displayed on this page. And it's explained in detail, if you're not familiar with the licenses, at the link that is provided to the right of the logo. In this particular example, you can also see that this guide is a derivative of some sort. So it's based on some other material that NanoLink previously created and is presumably linked here as well. Now, the NanoLink example is one way that you might add a Creative Commons license to a PDF, but you could also add licenses to websites or blogs, other offline documents. So those include things like Word documents, for example, images and audio files, and even data sets. So I've provided a link here, and I'll provide it at the end of the presentation again, that you can visit to see tips on how to mark or how to add these logos or icons to various types of works, as well as best practices for how to attribute other creators. So how to give credit to others if you are adapting, transforming, or building upon their work in some way. The Creative Commons website and their wiki do a really good job of explaining what the licenses are, how to choose the right license for you, and how to affix that license to the various formats on this slide. So I strongly recommend having a look at their website if you're interested in adding Creative Commons licenses to your work. That was a lot. So we're going to take a brief pause here.
All right, some questions, and we have several. Starting with Kendra, Maury asked about simulations and whether they could be archived. I suspect it depends on exactly what the simulation is, but why don't you address that?
Yes, in fact, we do have some in the collection. It really depends on how you created the material, if you're using proprietary software of some sort, and how those file formats have been created and stored. So what we typically do with materials that are either demonstrations, simulations, or games is ask you to upload those files to a shared drive of some sort, maybe to Google Drive, along with any necessary software so that we can have a look at the licenses of that software and sort of determine whether or not we can make everything that you have available, or if we can only make particular files available, in which case we will describe in the description for other users what software they need to gain access to in order to run that simulation on their own machines.
All right, and then Mike asked us about whether there was a cost for archiving, and there is not. It is free. It's part of what we do at AT Central. And Heather asked Kendra, should archiving be done throughout the grant life, or should archiving occur at the end of the funding project?
It all really depends. You can do it either way. There's no deadline for archiving your materials. For some projects, especially research projects, it makes sense to archive at the end because that important deliverable, the report or whatever it is that you were funded to create, isn't actually done until the end of the grant period, and that's perfectly fine. For other projects, it's easier to archive as you go. So if you're creating curriculum over the course of 2 or 3 years for multiple courses, it may well make sense for you to archive each course as those materials are created so that you don't have to go back and try to do everything at once at the end. So either way is perfectly fine. It really just depends on what makes the most sense to you.
Okay, and then Al asked about what's the best way to provide us with a video? Should it be an MP4, or is it easier to send a YouTube link?
That's a very good question because this problem comes up a lot. So in order to archive, we do need to have an actual file. So the MP4 is the file that we would need. Once you upload it to YouTube, we can no longer download it from YouTube. So if you have it on YouTube, that's great because then we can link to it in your resource record and make it very easy for people to find. But then we will also attach that MP4 copy to the record so that it's actually archived, it's on our servers, and people can download it if that YouTube link were ever to break or to go away in some way. So for archiving, we do need the actual MP4.
All right, and then Tony asked, can AT Central give me data on who has accessed or how many times my resource has been accessed?
Yes, we will talk briefly about that later, but all active PIs receive an email from ATE Central called an activity report. You receive it 4 times a year, so there's quarterly reports and 1 annual report at the beginning of the year about the previous year. And those reports will provide you any information that we have about the resources we've collected for you. So in that report, it will tell you how many materials you've archived with us and how many times those materials have been viewed, either how many times the resource record has been viewed, so people have read a description, or how many times people have accessed a link or the download associated with those. So like I mentioned, I'll talk about it a little later on, but you do receive that information emailed directly to you. You don't need to request it every 3 months.
Okay, we're caught up.
Okay.
Okay, and we have another poll question here that Mike's just opening. We want to learn a little bit more about you again, just in terms of where you are, in the sort of arc of doing your archiving with AT Central. So are you just looking for information on archive either because you're doing grant writing or to just be better informed? Are you planning to archive within the next year, or you're ready to go now and so that's part of the reason you're doing it, or again, other? So go ahead and put those in. Kendra, Valerie just put something in chat while folks are doing this. She took over as a PI on July 1. How does she get info updated with AT Central so she's getting the activity reports?
There's absolutely nothing you have to do. So as soon as your name is added to the NSF award database, we check that database regularly and make sure that our records are up to date. So as soon as we update our records, your name will automatically appear in there, and you'll start receiving emails from us through just sort of our automated emails that we send out. However, if you would like to send me an email and let me know that you took over SPI, I can get you added immediately. So either way is perfectly fine.
All right, and here we got the poll results. Most of the highest percentage of people who are planning to archive within the year. So that's
Very
great to
nice.
see. Yep. And then we got a couple people who are in the other category, and some who are ready to do it now, and then just in the sort of second place is that seeking general information on archiving. Well, thanks everybody for filling that out. That's great to see.
It looks like we're going to have a busy year.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Right.
so let's move on to the archiving service. So the ATE Central offers a virtual space where the deliverables of your project or center are collected, stored, and made publicly available in a digital format. The goal of the ATE Central Archiving Service really is to expand and extend the impact of your work beyond the life of your grant cycle. So even as your grants come to an end, your materials will remain available through the ATE Central Resource Portal. The next 6 slides talk about how to submit your deliverables to ATE Central for archiving specifically. We'll look at what happens to your materials after we've received them and how you can track our progress in processing your materials. So to submit your materials for archiving, you will need to be logged in to the ATE Central website. If you don't yet have an ATE account, simply click on the sign in link provided in the upper right-hand corner on the atecentral.net homepage. Creating that account is, of course, free. And once you're logged in, you can find the archive submission form at the URL provided here, atcentral.net/archiving/submissions. Or you can access the archiving services page under that resources tab that you see there in the main navigation. It'll drop down and just say archiving service. Click on that, and it'll be pretty clear, hopefully, from there where you need to go. To begin a new submission, so you'll see this page on my screen right now. You would click that Create New Submission button in the bottom right-hand corner. If you go to this page and you do not see that button, it means you're not logged in, and rather than that button, there'll be a prompt to ask you to log into your account first. Alternatively, and here's where we get to the activity reports, you can access the submission form directly from your activity report. So for those of you who are PIs, or if you've been selected by your PI to receive ATE Central emails, you're probably already familiar with the activity reports, which we send out each quarter, like I said earlier, and they describe the data we've collected about your project, about your resources, and about the events that you've promoted through your website. Our next report will go out on October 1st, which is a Thursday, I believe. If we have an existing resource record for materials that have not yet been archived, that is, if we know that you've created materials, maybe because we found them on your website while I was looking around for new things to add, but you haven't actually archived with us yet, we will already have some data about that resource. And if we have that data, then you will see this little tiny archive button to the right of the recommended resources for archiving. So this one is a to-do checklist. And if you click on that itty bitty little archive button, it's going to take you directly to the archive submission form. The form would actually already be pre-populated with everything ATE Central knows about your resource. So all you would have to do if you access the form through this button is upload a file and submit. Well, upload, accept the terms and conditions, and submit. So it's easier to submit your materials for archiving through the activity report than filling out a blank form. Just a second here. Looks like the screen is not advancing anymore.
Decided to freeze for a minute. Very nice.
Yes, bear with me here for a second. We'll see if we can get it.
For some reason, it seems to do, sometimes after a poll, it seems to freeze on the next slide. The mysteries of Zoom.
Okay.
Can you escape, Kendra, or get out and come back in, maybe?
Or maybe a right click, Kendra, to show next slide. Pull up another menu.
Let's see. Right now, it's not even showing me my cursor. Just so give me a second here.
Okay, no problems. Rachel will tell us an interesting story while you're working. No, I'm just kidding, Rachel.
Well, I can always tell an interesting story,
Yeah.
Mike.
Yes.
Let's see. We had a couple of other questions too here. Somebody chatted me privately about whether archiving with AT Central, if you're thinking about writing a grant, whether you can include the archiving in your data management plan. And I mentioned that in the slide briefly at the beginning when I was talking about AT Central and the archiving service. You can not only put it in, for those of you who are writing grants, because I think there were some people who indicated that they were working on grants right now. It's not only appropriate, but I think it's really encouraged. So it's something that you can talk about in your data management plan, and we're happy to help you with that if you're confused about how you would do that. It's also something that you can talk about in the body of your proposal when you talk about sustainability. So one of the things you can say is that, as we work to sustain the deliverables of our project, one of the ways we're going to do that is by working with AT Central to make sure that that's in that our materials get into the archiving service and end up in a more long-term way in the collection. All right, it seems like Kendra came
She's
out
sort
and
of
came
back.
back in.
Yeah.
Sort of out.
Well,
Unfortunately, it's all hung up now.
Is it, Mike? Do we want to switch for a little bit and have you share maybe, or what do you think is the best thing to do?
Sure, that's a good idea. So folks, hold on. And while we're doing this, Rachel, I think there is an expectation amongst reviewers, that there is going to be this connection with ATE Central, don't you think?
Oh, I think so too. And I think it's a great thing to put in there. Lots of people sort of forget to. I mean, it's a requirement. So in a way, maybe, people think they don't need to include it, but I know that it's a great thing to put into your grant proposal. I also got a question from someone, because Kendra had just shown that form. Kendra, somebody had said that they have a lot of stuff to archive there at the end. Do they really need to use the online form to submit? And I think the answer to that is no, if they have lots.
No. The form is an easy way to submit to us if you have a smaller amount of materials, or especially if you're archiving as you go. But if you're towards the end of your project and you have a whole bunch of material, the easiest thing to do is just to reach out to us and let us know, and then we'll find some way to share those files. We might use a Google Drive folder, for example, and just upload everything there, or Dropbox, Box, something along those lines. Any way you can get us the materials is perfectly fine. Okay, Mike, do you have control of things now?
Just 1 second.
I think you're about the right place too.
Yeah, I think so. I've got to get to the launch of the slideshow. Sorry everyone for the delay here. Just a second.
Always something.
Yeah.
Let's see if I've got some other questions too. Kendra, somebody asked me too, what are some of the common challenges you hear from community members who are archiving? Someone said, as they start to think about planning, they were trying to think about, ways to avoid common pitfalls. What do you hear from folks, or what do you see when you all are doing archiving? What are some of the things people bump up against?
I think one of the most common challenges are for people who don't really start thinking about archiving until much later down the road. And then it may be difficult to remember, okay, what everything have I created? Where is it? There might be multiple faculty members who all have curriculum on their various laptops or desktops, and then it requires quite a bit of effort to find everything, to get everything in one central location, and to really organize those materials before archiving. So the earlier you start thinking about archiving, the easier it is to keep track of materials. Even if it's just a folder on Google Drive where you drop everything right away, that can be particularly helpful further down the road.
Looks like we're back, Kendra and Rachel.
Excellent. This looks great. Could you go ahead and advance us to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
And one more. Okay, here we go. So this is what the submission form actually looks like. This one here is sort of the most basic kind of submission you might have. It's an individual file. So this file is called imageinterpretation.doc. When submitting a deliverable using the archive submission form, you should really only upload a single file. And that file should not exceed 1 gigabyte, which is a very large file. So it doesn't happen all too frequently unless you're submitting simulations or games, that kind of thing. So if you'd like to submit a group of related files, let's say you have a lesson plan, some presentation slides, maybe an activity, you'd first want to place those documents in a folder, compress it, and then upload that single zip file rather than uploading the individual files. You can also submit a zip file that contains multiple folders and subfolders as long as all the materials are related. So really, you could submit a single zipped folder that has hundreds of documents all for an academic course, for example. So as long as you drop them into that single folder, zip it up, and then upload it to the form, that's perfectly good. On this form, you'll note that the required fields are identified by little yellow circles around the field name. So you must upload a file. You need to add your award number and a contact name and email, someone that we can get a hold of if we have questions about the material. And then you also must agree to the terms at the bottom there. And really what you're doing is acknowledging that you're either the copyright holder or that you are an authorized representative thereof, and that we may your materials for preservation and archiving purposes. Then you'll also ask to verify that we may distribute those materials freely. If you're submitting materials that you don't want made publicly available, let's say answer keys, for example, I'd recommend contacting me directly about those, because you do have to accept the terms of the form in order to submit it. All the other fields are optional, including the description field, where you're really welcome to add anything that you want. It could be a brief summary describing the resource, or information about when the resource was created. Maybe it's a presentation for a conference and you can tell us what the conference was called and when the material was presented, who the presenter was. really anything that you might think is important, we edit that description. It does not get published as is. So feel free not only to describe the resource, but to add any type of comments that you might have about the resource that you're submitting. You can then also add the ATE area, and at the bottom there you'll see there's a little box next to the word licensing, and if you click that, then you will receive an email directly from the system that has some basic information about copyright. If you have a handful of submissions, you are welcome to submit this form as many times as you like. Slide, please.
Kendra, can I ask one thing?
Sure.
Richard asked, are we able to provide a link to Dropbox files or folders? And I think he means through the form, but I don't think you can provide that you can't do that in the form, but you can do that in an email to you, right? I mean,
Yes.
if someone has, as Kendra mentioned, if you have a bunch of things, that's probably a better way to go if it's a huge amount or for some other reason. And I think people do that
Exactly.
quite a bit, don't they, Kendra?
Yes, it's pretty common. So you would just email archiving@atecentral.net. That'll also be on one of the later slides. So just reach out to us, let us know who you are, and that all the material is in that provided at that link, and just make sure that you set the permissions for the folder so that we can access it, and that's really all you have to do. Okay, so once you've submitted something through the form, a table will appear on the archive submission page. So this is the page that we looked at originally with the Create New Submission button. You can access anything you've already submitted and check on the status of your submissions on this page. So you see a few example submission statuses at the bottom. Unreviewed indicates that no one has begun processing the submission yet. Pending usually indicates that the support specialist, Michelle, has a question about the submission that has not yet been resolved, and chances are you would have already received an email from her by the time you see that status. Submission received indicates that the submission has been reviewed, that it's complete, and that it's been moved into the resource portal for processing. And there's also a submission closed status that usually indicates that a submission was combined with some other material or that it could not be processed for some reason. But in most cases, you're going to see your submission status change directly from unreviewed to submission received. As long as the submission is unreviewed, you can go back and edit it at any time. And you can see here, there's that little red circle. This unreviewed submission still has a little edit button, and you will see that button as long as you can make those changes. Once someone has started processing the material and the submission status changes from unreviewed to something else, that edit button will disappear and you will no longer be able to make changes on your own. If you still have changes that you'd like to make, then you would just have to email the archiving@atcentral.net and let us know via email instead. Okay, slide please. Before we break for a few more questions, I think we've gotten quite a few in already. I'm going to talk briefly about what happens to your materials after you've uploaded everything to the archive submission form. So here's a little flow chart. I'm a big fan of flow charts. And it describes sort of the archiving process at AT Central. After you submit, our support specialist, Michelle, whom some of you may have already worked with, will receive an email notification about your submission, and she will then review it, and if she has any questions, contact the person. If the submission is considered complete and we have no questions, it'll be moved into the resource portal for processing. And then a cataloger will receive a notification that there's new archiving for them to work on. The cataloger adds all the necessary metadata to the resource record. So the metadata is the information that we add that describes what the resource is. And we'll look at some examples of the fields in a minute. Once all that metadata is added, Michelle will be notified once again that archiving is complete, and then she will reach out to the submitter with an email saying that your archiving is done and here's the link to all your materials. And then the submitter is asked just to look over the records that we created and to let us know if you have any feedback or if there's any changes that you would like to see made. Slide, please. So during the process, our staff, our catalogers, add a lot of information or metadata to our records that describe the material. And this data makes it possible for others to find the materials they need either through keyword searching or through some type of advanced search options that are available through the AT Central Resource Portal. So we add a title to the resource, a URL if there is one available. So if you still have the material on your website or if it's on YouTube, for example, we'll add that URL just because it makes it easier for people to view the material than downloading it. We will upload all the files that you provided to us. And then we'll also add something called series or relation data. So if you submit, let's say, a 3-part webinar, and those webinars each have separate records, we'll link those 3 records together in this field so that it's easy to find all the related resources that we have. We add information about the creator, about the publisher. We'll write a description about what the resource is. Sometimes those descriptions are very short. If it's a PDF activity, for example, it might just be 1 paragraph. But if it's an entire academic course, it could be quite lengthy and have information not only about what the course is, but it might highlight learning objectives, describe what resources are in the zip file for download, and also give some information about how best to approach those materials. For example, where one might want to start with the syllabi, for example, or other materials that make sense. We add a variety of subject terms to make the materials more accessible via keyword search. The date the material was produced, if it has one, and then also some information about resource type, format, and language. So resource type are those 4 areas that I mentioned earlier, whether it's instructional, assessment, professional development, or reference material. We identify who we believe the target audience of the material to be. Is it for educators or learners? And sometimes we might add an audience refinement. So some of the materials in the AT Central Resource Portal are created for a particular subset of people. We have projects, for example, that work on women in STEM. So we might highlight the fact that these materials are made specifically for programs focusing on female students in the metadata as well. We identify what education level we believe the material to be appropriate for, any type of teaching methodology or practices, and then also information about the copyright or if there are Creative Commons licenses attached to those materials. So all of this happens behind the scenes. Our catalogers add all of this material or metadata. You are not responsible for that at all. But when you are asked to review your resource records after submission, we just hope that you look through the information that we've added and let us know if you have any changes. Maybe you feel like our education level or audience is a little off, for example. We're happy to make those changes and always appreciate feedback directly from PIs or other staff members. Slide. There we go.
All right, we have a couple of questions, Kendra. I think I know the answer to this first one, but we have a question that says, how long does the archiving process take? Just a rough estimate.
Oh, that really depends.
I knew that was going to be the answer.
Centers generally have a lot more materials than projects, and those might take quite a bit of time. But when you submit, you get placed into our queue, and we generally process in the order that we receive, with the exception of very large collector that has submitted 500 different documents, and then a project submits a report. we will go ahead and finish that report pretty quickly before we continue processing the large collection. So generally speaking, we try to have a turnaround time of 1 or 2 weeks for small collections, but larger ones could take a couple of weeks, if not a few months to process, depending on the size.
Yeah, I think also what's confusing to people sometimes is that you have to remember the resource, quote unquote.
Rachel, I can't hear you.
Oh.
I can hear Rachel fine. Kendra, I think you might be having an internet bandwidth issue, but I can hear Rachel fine.
Okay, good. I was just going to say that one of the things that can determine it too is that people will send us a resource, and it could be a 2-page PDF, or it could be an entire course. And if it's an entire course with modules and all kinds of other things, obviously that's going to take much, much longer than if it's just a PDF, so a short PDF. So it's just so dependent on so many different factors. The other thing that we got asked was, Pat said that they have quite a few videos stored in Kaltura and links to them.
Am I the only person who can no longer hear you?
Yes.
Yes.
Hold on. Can you, Mike, can you see if she can hear you?
I can hear both you and Kendra. Kendra,
Okay,
it's
could you go
Mike.
ahead and
Can you hear me, Kendra?
say something now?
Yes, I'm speaking now, Kendra. Can you hear me? Kendra, I'm speaking now. Can you hear me?
No. Let's see. Let's just see if she can.
Okay.
Just
As
keep
I
going.
understand this, everyone can hear me, but I
Yes,
cannot hear you. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Excellent. Then how about we do this? I'm going to move on to the next slide. Is that what we should go ahead and do?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Can you still hear me? Why don't you go ahead and do your poll question, Rachel, while I figure this out?
Okay. So can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, yay. See, we got that straightened out. So Mike, why don't you pop this next poll question up? And then Kendra, there's a question from Pat Jarvis in chat. I don't know if you can see. Oh, you should be able to see that because you're not screen sharing anymore. Asking about videos stored. Take a look at that, and then we'll do the poll, and we can come back to that question. All right, so here's the next poll question. Now that you're familiar with the archiving process, what areas would you like information or help on? So you can see preparing materials for archiving, addressing licensing and IP issues, finding licensed AT materials for my own use. So you might want to look through the archive and figure out how to utilize those materials, all the above, or something else that we didn't mention in the list. So go ahead and take a moment or two here to vote on the poll.
Rachel, as a reminder to attendees, they have to click submit once they choose their response. They've got to submit it. So I've got a lot of responses in. Let's give them a few more seconds.
Sure.
I'll do a countdown. Yeah.
Okay, so should I just go ahead and address Pat's question while we do
that?
that?
That's great.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Pat has a question about submitting videos that are stored in Kaltura, which I'm assuming is a learning management system based on the question. They are captured and licensed by Creative Commons. And the question here is, can I submit them as a zipped IMSCC file for others to access? So if you're not familiar, an IMSCC file is the file format that a learning management system will export an entire academic course out of the system. And the idea is that others can take an IMSCC file and then import it into basically any learning management system. So if you use Blackboard or Canvas, you should be able to upload the entire course via an IMSCC file. So the answer to that is yes, you are more than welcome to submit IMSCC files, and we will keep them in that format and make them available so that others can upload your course.
Oh, that's great, Kendra. Thank you for answering that. I would not have known how to answer that one. So
there's
here
the
we
results.
are. Yeah, here are the results. So yeah, most people would just like more info on preparing materials for archiving, but we also have some, interestingly, again, sort of pretty evenly scattered throughout the other and all of the above. And if you want to tell us what your other is, one person said other, please feel free to pop that in the chat window. That's very good for us to know as we prepare future webinars and other materials. Mike, do you want to advance? All right, so we did mention that we're going to have a live demo. This is something Kendra and Corey Halpin, who's another AT Central staff member, are going to be doing at the ATPI conference, and that's going to be on the 21st, which is a Wednesday, from 1 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And you'll find that in the conference program, and you'll be getting copies of the slides, so you'll get a little reminder about that too. Go ahead and advance.
Okay, so if you would like to get a hold of us after the webinar, feel free to email us at archiving@atcentral.net. You can also join us on chat at talk.ate.community, or reach out to us at ATE Connects on October 20th, which is part of the virtual ATEPI conference this year.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to do a virtual PI conference.
True.
Yikes.
And finally, here are a few links that just might be of interest to you. These slides will be made available, as Mike mentioned earlier, so you can always go back and take a look. The first few slides here are all links to various ATE Central pages about archiving. So the first two are on archiving, the third is on activity reports, and the last one on sustainability planning. And then we have 3 more links that are about copyright and Creative Commons licenses. Okay, so thank you all so much for participating in today's webinar, and especially for bearing with me during all of my technical issues.
We had some technical issues, not bad though.
Yes, well, luckily we have Mike here to fix things.
Exactly.
And I'll just mention that as you exit the webinar today, you will be asked to take a brief survey. We'd very much appreciate your feedback, so please take a minute or two to let us know how we did. And with that, Rachel, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it. Thank you everybody for coming, and again, please take the survey as you exit. It should pop up for you as you leave.
And Rachel, just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll get automatically a link to the recording and the slides. And I know my colleagues online will join me in thanking both you and Kendra for the presentation today. It's something not only do we got to do it, but it's a good idea to do, right? To be part of this, to share the results through this really unique system that you've created at ATE Central. So thank you both.
Thank you,
Colleagues,
Mike.
that officially ends the audio and broadcast portion of our webinar today. I'm going to stop the recording. We'll leave the system open for a few minutes. I think Rachel and Kendra, you can just shut down your systems. I'll leave it open for a few minutes as people
That's right.
exit for today. So
That's
thanks
right.
everyone. That ends our webinar. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.